Good morning, welcome back to the third day of the roundtable. And this morning we have a panel with the focus on everyday creativity. Well, personally, I'm very excited about this trade paper because I think this afternoon I would have the license to go and upgrade my sad little mobile phone so that it would, without any guilt actually, to a GPS compatible version for creative fiction writing. I can also stay online in my virtual world without complaining with my partners, and shush him up as well. But I probably need to talk to Crispin about the creative license there. So we have our first speakers, Dr. Crispin Thurlow, the Prize of Play Creative License in New Media Discourse. Dr. Thurlow is Associate Professor of Communication at the University of Washington, Seattle, and we are also very grateful that he didn't bring the rain to Hong Kong. His primary research agenda is to examine the ways people use language and other semiotic modes to negotiate and make sense of boundary of difference in everyday social interactions. So without further delay.
I want to take one of these bottles home. Great. Just so we're all on the same page here, it's 25 to 10, okay? Half an hour. Right, okay, that's my bureaucratic moment. Thank you very much, Rodney, Kingsley, the Department of English, everybody else. This really has been the most extraordinary conference. It's an incredible luxury to sit around in a round table, more or less, and really have something very intellectually enriching, which I don't find when I go to these large conferences. Most of the conferences I go, this has been really pleasurable and very tasty as well, so thank you. So everyone should have a handout. I know that there's an awful lot of Thurlow in there. I just wanted to, because it's such an interdisciplinary conference, it seems like the most awful act of self-promotion, but I wanted to share some of where this is all coming from. As well as some of the literature that backs the experiment that I'm engaged in today. I'm really just trying out some stuff today, based on some of the stuff I've done before. I'm just trying to sort of play with some of these ideas, particularly addressing this idea of creativity. What I also want to do today is shift us to a slightly less lofty reflection on this issue of creativity. There's been quite a lot of talk about elite creativity, which is absolutely fine. I always like a little bit of elite, nothing wrong with it. But I want to sort of think today a little bit about the more banal practices of creativity, particularly with reference to young people's creative practice in new media, language, and discourse. And in particular what I want to do is I want to play with the idea of playful, the sensual, the pleasurable. And I borrowed the metaphor from a colleague of mine at the University of Washington. He's got this fantastic book called Our Space. She's a rhetorician, so I switched out the word rhetoric for discourse. It's a bit of a battle I have in America. But she uses this idea, particularly of the pinball machine, to sort of frame the interesting dialectical relationship between tradition and newness, between the creative and convention, and actually it's sort of playing with the idea that actually it's through the normative constraints and structural traditions that the creative emerges. It's not in spite of it, it's because of it. And so I'm interested in that idea. And also particularly playing with this notion of the kairotic, which she borrows from someone else. This idea of the kairotic, the sort of spontaneous, in-the-moment kind of practices. The stuff that probably seems very purposeless, and certainly not very strategic, and not in that sort of sense. There's a lot of reflexivity in what I see in new media discourse, but not sort of explicitly strategic, I guess. So that's the creative license, which I'll come to at the end. It's this tension between sort of freedom and regulation, and the way that creativity emerges somehow out of that tension, which I think is perfectly normal and also very special. And I think new media discourse exemplifies this very beautifully. So what I want to do to start with is to start with a foil, something to work against. And this comes out of some of the work that I've been doing, looking at the way that the media talk about new media language and young people's practices. Now, when President Obama sends a text message, it becomes phenomenal news. Everyone's terribly excited. This is like, what, 9 months ago when he selected his vice presidential running mate, Biden. And he announced it by text message. And the media took this up, and it was this ridiculous kind of rhetoric, this hype around the most highly anticipated text message in human history. It's just ridiculous. insane. And this is from respectable journalists. But what struck me about this immediately was like, oh, so when the president of the free world text messages, it's fantastic, it's celebrated, it's just, so when it's hieroglyphic, it's great. Well, of course, this is in stark contrast to what happens when the media talks about the way young people text message and use technology, which I'll show you in a second. So it's this idea of the elite practice is cool, is good, is lauded. When it's non-elite, it gets vilified. So let me show you my favorite example of this. This is from these two studies I did, these two papers I published around just collecting a large sort of data set of newspaper articles from around the world, English language articles, which specifically looked at young people, language, and new media. Okay? And it was striking how critical, how negative, consistently negative and oppositional they were. This is one of my favorite ones, needless to say, from the Daily Telegraph. British education experts have warned of the potentially damaging effect on literacy of cell phone text messaging after a student handed in an essay written in text shorthand. The 13-year-old girl, explained that she found it easier than standard English. There are very few things in life that are not actually easier than standard English. I could not believe what I was seeing, said her teacher, who asked not to be identified. This became, I mean, I spent a lot of time tracking this moral panic. It was extraordinary. It was taken up around the world in the English language press. Huge, huge thing. A year later, this is 2003, a year later, The Guardian published what was supposed to be an extract from this shocking, appalling essay. Okay, see if you can translate this. Let me help you out here, yeah? It's just a game. My summer holidays were a complete waste of time. Before, we used to go to New York to see my brother, his girlfriend, and their 3 screaming kids face to face. I love New York, it's great, but my parents were so worried because of 9/11 that they decided to stay in Scotland and spend 2 weeks up north. Up north, what you see is what you get. Nothing. I was very, very, very bored in the middle of nowhere. Nothing but sheep and mountains. Now, I've done work which actually looks at actual text messaging. This is a very spectacular type of text messaging. I suspect if it's real, and there's no reason to believe that it's necessarily real either, if it's real, she knew precisely what she was doing. She was maxing out on text messaging style here. She was definitely, I think, yanking her teacher's chain is a nice way of putting it. And it's rather delightful to think, wow, little did she know what this would end up producing. So 1,600 web pages devoted to this sort of this issue. More interesting for me is that this creative practice, I mean, it's very creative if it's real, and even if it's not, there are things like it, not quite so intensely abbreviated and emoticons and so on. But this is how it gets picked up and run with. This week we learned that the current generation, not one 13-year-old girl in the north of Scotland, the current generation of teenagers is so estranged from real language that a 13-year-old in the west of Scotland has submitted an essay to a teacher in text messaging shorthand. The great grammar crusade that Debbie Cameron was, just rides roughshod over any kind of creativity, any kind of cultural practice, embedded cultural practice. Okay? And we know that this is how people talk about language. We know this is how people get their knickers in a knot about technology. But it's so consistent, so consistently negative, so consistently eclipsing the creative, that I'm pissed off. Okay. So there are a couple of ways that this particular version, this particular misrepresentation of young people's creative practice gets produced. And there are just two that I think are particularly dominant, two particular sort of orders of discourse that work together to sort of accelerate this or exaggerate it. And the one is the kind of monetizing of play, and using this word, my blog was recently, I was invited to monetize my blog by sort of putting ads all over it. So I love this word, monetize. But it's the kind of work that semiotic merchants like advertisers and marketers are very busy doing. And this is the sort of the commodifying of these practices, packaging them up and selling them back to teenagers. And kids are damned if they do and damned if they don't. If you don't have a cell phone, you're a non-person, okay? Very subtle. But if you do, all hell's coming, breaking loose and coming down on you. You think, come on, not fair, not fair.